The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
And welcome to Squawk Box Europe, a big Friday morning, and we've got full team coverage for you. I'm Juliana Tadabon with Karen Cho, Sylvia Amaro, and Dan Murphy is with us in Dubai. These are your headlines.
First today, Israel launches unilateral strikes on military and nuclear targets across Iran, killing top leaders and wiping out key infrastructure.
I've made it clear time and again, Israel will never allow those who call for our annihilation to develop the means to achieve that goal. Tonight, Israel backs those words with action.
Iran's supreme leader vows retaliation, saying Israel should expect, quote, extreme punishment, while the Israeli military says Tehran has launched more than 100 drones toward Israel in just the last few hours.
And oil surges to its highest level in almost 5 months, while investors rush to safe havens and global equities pull back amid the uncertainty.
The international community reacts, with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer calling for restraint and calm, while Saudi Arabia condemns the attack and says it violates sovereignty and international law.
We have got major news out of the Middle East this morning. Israel has launched a series of airstrikes against Iran, killing key military leaders and hitting sites that it says were related to Iran's nuclear program. In response, Israeli military officials say Iran has launched more than 100 drones toward it in the past few hours. The U.S. has distanced itself from the attacks, saying it did not participate, but that President Trump was briefed beforehand. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the operation will continue for as long as it takes to remove Iran's nuclear threat.
I want to assure the civilized world, we will not let the world's most dangerous regime get the world's most dangerous weapons. And Iran plans to give those weapons, nuclear weapons, to its terrorist proxies. That would make the nightmare of nuclear terrorism all too real. The increasing range of Iran's ballistic missiles would bring that nuclear nightmare to the cities of Europe and eventually to America. Remember, Iran calls Israel the small Satan. It calls America the great Satan. And this is why for decades, it's led millions in the chants of death to Israel and death to America. Today, Israel is responding to those genocidal calls with action and with a call of our own. Long live Israel! And long live America. Our action will help make the world a much safer place.
According to a White House official, U.S.-Iran talks are still expected to take place this weekend. Representatives are set to meet in Oman on Sunday to discuss Tehran's nuclear program, the sixth such round of talks since April. Meantime, the head of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami, was killed in the attacks, as well as the chief of the country's armed forces.
And Iran's supreme leader said he would not let Israel's actions go unpunished, saying it has blood on its hands and faces a bitter fate. Israel has declared a state of emergency, warning of an expected drone and missile attack in the immediate future. Its military says Iran has launched more than 100 drones towards it in the past hours, with one military official warning Israel is in for, quote, a rough few hours. Iran has also warned that it sees the U.S. as jointly responsible for the attacks as Israel's main supporter. So let's see how oil prices are moving at this hour. We have seen a spike in oil prices earlier today. We had WTI up by more than 13% at one point. We have come off from those peaks. At this stage, we have WTI up about 7.6%, trading at about $73.2 a barrel. And Brent also tracking higher by more than 7% at this hour. In terms of gold, you also have that on your screen. We have seen investors rushing to safe haven assets, and indeed that has also propelled gold prices at this stage up by more than 1.2%. Let's bring in Dan Murphy. Dan has been, of course, following all of the developments in this story. Then just highlight for us if we have gotten anything in the last couple of minutes that we haven't yet discussed.
Good morning. Well, if you are just tuning in or just catching up, let me add some context to this very volatile situation. First, I don't think it's a stretch to say this is a dangerous escalation in one of the world's most volatile rivalries. And of course, the full scope of the attack, including the number of casualties, is still unknown. But as we've reported this morning, Israel has said that more than 100 targets were struck in Iran overnight, and this attack on Iran involved more than 200 fighter jets. It is certainly significant in its size and scope, at least as far as we can ascertain at this point. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also saying this operation was aimed squarely at dismantling Iran's nuclear program. He's vowed that this campaign will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat. Iranian state media also reporting the deaths of two of the country's most senior military officials. So from the Israeli standpoint, you could perhaps say that they are claiming victory today and calling this a strategic win. General Mohammad Hossein Bagheri, this is Iran's top military officer, is said to have been killed. Also reported dead at this hour is Hossein Salami. He is Commander-in-Chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps. This is one of the most powerful figures in Iran's defense establishment. Anyone who has been following the story inside Iran, and in particular the political situation inside Iran over the last few years, knows exactly how critically important the IRGC is. So this is a very significant decapitation inside Iran, one that will have consequences for months, perhaps even years to come. And of course, also confirmed dead are 6 Iranian nuclear scientists. That's according to Iranian state media. That too is a major blow to Iran's nuclear ambitions, which clearly Israel views as an existential threat. Israel, for its part, also declaring a national state of emergency earlier today, warning that missile and drone attacks from Iran are now likely. What we also know is that Israel's military said that Iran had already launched more than 100 drones in the last hour, but of course the impact of those strikes are unclear. So yes, we are expecting an Iranian retaliation, an Iranian response. Of course, the big question mark for anyone exposed to risk assets on the move right now is what will that reaction function actually look like, and how far is the Iranian leadership willing to go to hit back at this most recent Israeli strike. For its part, the United States also distancing itself from this action. Earlier today, we heard from Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who said Washington had no role in these strikes, and also added that the Trump administration's top priority is the safety of American forces in the region. What makes this so significant is the fact that Israel has acted unilaterally here. In years gone by, perhaps we would not have seen this type of emboldenment from the Israeli leadership, but they have decided it was in their best interests, not just from a nation-state level, but perhaps for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at a personal political level, that this strike go ahead. And of course, the timing is no coincidence as well. This also comes just days after we saw the International Atomic Energy Agency also formally declaring Iran out of compliance with its nuclear commitments as well. That was the first such finding in 2 decades by the UN's top nuclear watchdog. So it's pretty clear internally what has led to this, and that is the fact that Israeli officials have obviously grown increasingly alarmed over signs that the US might be inching towards a nuclear deal with Iran that did not align with Israel's interests, particularly on this key sticking point of enrichment. As we've reported, those fresh round of talks are set to get underway again this weekend. Again, what these are going to look like is a big question mark at this point. Whether or not both sides will actually show up, also still a big question mark. But as we come on air this morning, obviously a very dangerous and volatile situation still unfolding in the region, one that we will be tracking very closely for you.
Dan, terrific coverage. This is a developing story, and as such, we've got some fresh lines out now from the UAE and Qatar reaction to the developments overnight. The UAE coming out condemning in the strongest terms Israel's military targeting of Iran, expressing deep concern over the repercussions on regional security. And then you've got Qatar coming out saying that it strongly condemns Israel's attack on Iran, says it is a flagrant violation of Iran's sovereignty and security. Dan, let me toss that back out to you. We've had now more reaction from other nations in the region. We've already heard from Saudi this morning. Talk to us, just flesh out the implications for the broader region here.
Widespread implications for the broader region on two fronts. The first is, of course, geopolitical. What we see among the Gulf states is an increased commitment for peace and prosperity in this part of the world. It is part of the national mantra here. So no surprises to see this most recent action by Israel being completely condemned by those leaders in Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who see this regional escalation as bad for business in this part of the world. And also the second point to add here is off the back of the spike that we've seen in oil prices, WTI up some double digits earlier in the session and actually tracking at February 2020 highs. That type of volatility is also unwelcomed in this part of the world, which has been prioritizing investment and prioritizing the building of its economy and building of its society, not looking to these decades-old regional conflicts. So perhaps some frustration among leaders here, but at the same time as well, what we have seen is leaders among the Gulf states, and in particular those Abraham Accord signatories, who have also quietly stood to one side and perhaps even welcomed some of Israel's actions in recent months and indeed recent years to take out what Israel perceives to be terrorist threats or threats to the existence of its own state. What we have seen in recent months is Israel also acting to take out leaders among the Iranian proxies like Hamas, for example, in very sophisticated attacks. Also Israel moving to wipe out the leadership of Hezbollah in Lebanon as well. Leaders in this part of the world, in particular in the Gulf, watching those developments very closely, but also not necessarily condemning those actions in the interest of building up the safety and security of this part of the world. We were talking earlier about the fact that what we see here is really a tale of two Middle Easts. On the one side, the Gulf states prioritizing peace and prosperity, and then on the other side, the Iranians clearly still very unaligned with the current thinking in this part of the world when it comes to that peace and prosperity. And that's also part of the reason why we have seen these attacks from Israel unfold. Of course, lots of questions about where this leaves the Abraham Accords and what Israel's international standing looks like. But all of those things will be answered once we get through what is the immediate priority here, which is ascertaining exactly how Iran is going to respond.
Dan, thank you so much for your reporting. So much to think about as we progress through this program. Now, let's push on as the U.S. monitors the fallout of Israel strikes. The White House has said President Donald Trump will attend a National Security Council scheduled for 11 a.m. Eastern time. Take a look at the practical details that make. Let's take a look now at the situation from Ryan Bowles' standpoint, senior Middle East and North Africa analyst from RAIN. Ryan, thank you so much for being with us. For those viewers who are just waking up this morning, let me just kick off with a broad question. Your reaction to the developments overnight, how would you characterize the significance of this attack?
I think the timing is surprising, but the actual attack itself is less so. And the reason that the attack is less surprising is because the regional strategic context has really changed a great deal in the past 2 years. Iran's network of proxies and systems of deterrence have been steadily discredited or defeated by Israel ever since the October Hamas attack back in 2023. Bashar al-Assad is gone. Hezbollah was defeated. The Houthis have a very limited reach against Israel. And Israel has struck Iran twice in April of 2024 and October of 2024. And this really demonstrated to the Israelis, and particularly to Benjamin Netanyahu, that now is the moment that Iran is at its weakest and it is least capable of carrying out kind of a devastating retaliation against the state of Israel. And I think that is really what caused them to make this decision. The timing of it, I think we'll learn more about that later on. It is surprising that they did this before the formal collapse of U.S.-Iran nuclear talks.
On that note, what does this mean for the prospect of a nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran?
Well, certainly it doesn't bode well for that. The Iranians, at least from some of the initial reporting I've seen, seem like they won't be going to any future talks, especially since the Israelis are suggesting this is going to be an open-ended campaign that could last weeks. It could last even longer than that. They could try to treat Iran the way they did Syria, where they just carry out airstrikes unilaterally at will. Under those circumstances, it's very hard to see the Iranians going to any talks with the United States. That being said, from the American perspective, it's hard to say exactly what is going through this particular White House at any given time in terms of thoughts. But President Trump may believe that all of the risk for an operation like this can be absorbed by Israel, and all of the gains could be taken advantage of by the United States if these attacks convince the Iranians to come to nuclear talks in a more conciliatory mood. He may believe that a show of force and a show of strength will convince the Iranians to back away from their demands on enrichment, and that may be why he decided to give at least this yellow light for these attacks.
Well, I would like to focus on the U.S. for a moment, Ryan. We have, of course, the National Security Council meeting later today. I just would like to get your thoughts on what you think will be the immediate reaction, the immediate comment from the United States.
Well, the first reaction, I believe, is already taking place now, where we're seeing reports of U.S. and British and other allied fighters attempting to shoot down an Iranian drone barrage that is reportedly on its way to Israeli airspace. So we will expect to see the Americans take that very assertive defensive stance to protect Israel, just as we saw under the Biden administration. Now, in terms of political posturing tomorrow, I would expect that President Trump will still suggest that talks are possible, that de-escalation is possible, that the ball is in Iran's court if they're just willing to move away from their demands on enrichment. I think that he will have the same kind of rhetoric that he's had with Russia and Ukraine, where he's always keeping the door open for talks, but he's not offering a softening of his position that would allow for those talks to proceed without using force against the rival, in this case, against the Iranians.
Ryan, it's Karen jumping in. What occurs to me is that we have seen a lot of tactics deployed by Israel over the years in terms of targeting Hamas and key commanders. And in this particular case, we know that there has been the death of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, Hussein Salami, the head of that. So does this have some bearing in terms of the capabilities of Iran, or do they simply replace one commander with another?
Well, the defense establishment in Iran certainly does have some built-in resiliency for its leadership. It will be able to replace all of these losses. The nuclear scientists are a much more substantial loss given their expertise. But that being said, this is catastrophic for Iran's sense of security, for especially its politicians and its defense establishment. It's showing to them that they are almost as vulnerable to Israeli power as Hezbollah was back in the war that took place in 2024. It was always assumed, of course, that Hezbollah had enough deterrence to prevent the assassination of its top leadership. That wasn't true. And now it's being shown that Iran also doesn't have enough deterrent or even enough counterintelligence capabilities to prevent assassinations on its own soil. So it's not only a political scandal, it's an intelligence failure, and it's something that the Iranians are going to have to confront going forward if they're going to secure their regime from future assassination missions.
Ryan, we appreciate that you joined us this morning. Ryan Bowles, Senior Middle East and North Africa Analyst at RANE. And coming up on the show, a London-bound plane crashes in India, leaving only one survivor. We'll have the details. Plus, we'll bring you more on the market reaction as traders monitor a major escalation in the Middle East as Israel launches unilateral strikes on Iran. And plus, we'll also have the geopolitical fallout too, with the founder and chairman of Signum Global Advisors at 9 a.m. London time.
An Air India flight bound for London crashed almost immediately after takeoff in India's Ahmedabad. At least 290 people have been killed, including 241 passengers and crew. And let's get out to Phil LeBeau for the latest. Phil, what we've seen so far, one lone survivor, and this is the first fatal crash for a Boeing Dreamliner aircraft. So just talk us through the ramifications from here.
Well, it's a search for answers in the immediate time frame for both Boeing as well as the airlines that fly 787 Dreamliners. As you take a look at footage from the scene, it's remarkable that there was anybody who was able to survive this crash. But as you mentioned, there was one passenger who did survive. 241 other passengers were killed in the Air India crash. So what happens now with the investigation? Well, the NTSB and FAA have investigators headed to the crash scene. They left yesterday from Washington. They'll be there either later today or tomorrow. They'll be ready to start immediately investigating what's happening. The search is on for the data and cockpit voice recorders. Those will likely be retrieved perhaps even today, since it's a fairly confined crash scene. And then finally, Boeing and GE Aerospace, they're going to be assisting investigators analyzing the data, not only from the airplane, but also from the engines. Speaking of Boeing, the company announced late last night that Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg, who was scheduled to be here in Paris for the Paris Air Show starting on Sunday, he has decided that he will cancel his appearance here. He's going to be focusing instead on the investigation. And finally, take a look at shares of GE Aerospace. The company was scheduled to have an investor day on Tuesday. It has canceled that investor day. They will have it at a later date. That is the latest from here in Paris. Back to you.
Phil, thank you so much for your coverage from Paris. Let's continue the conversation about this tragic event with Anita Mendarata, founder of Anita Mendarata and Associates. Anita, thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you.
Some horrific news out of India yesterday, and this is the first time that a Boeing 787 has crashed. Boeing has obviously had a string of issues, but it's the first time that this model has had an accident of this scale. Give us your first reaction here when you saw the news and what it means for Boeing.
The first reaction that I saw the news was just heartbreak, as this is a massive impact to not only Boeing and Air India, but to the entire aviation community. When they look at the impact on Boeing itself, it's quite unfortunate because, as we know, the reputation and the trust around Boeing is still so fragile coming out of the last few years and the issues we've had with the 737 MAX. We've known it very well. Kelly Ortberg coming in as CEO in August last year, taking on the challenge, recognizing the fragility of the company as an iconic brand, as a trusted base of quality technology and innovation, and as ultimately a source of solid investment. He knew this, and he's been working very hard at changing operations, changing relationships, and changing the culture. So what's happening now with the 787 does not help at all, because it takes the spotlight back onto Boeing and the ability for people to trust its engineering and its commitment to the future of aviation. It's also important to recognize that the 787 is vital when it comes to the entire industry's focus on sustainable aviation. It was launched in 2011 as a manufacturing option for aviation going into the future, but uniquely, it is very strong when it comes to fuel efficiency, elimination of carbon emissions. It's very good for long-haul flights, and it's excellent when it comes to the actual experience for the passenger itself. So this is an important aircraft, and Air India has invested significantly in it by putting in an order for 200 new 787s only 2 years ago, which is a reflection, again, of the confidence of the future of Boeing under Kelly's leadership. It's also worth mentioning that the CEO of Air India, Campbell Wilson, a remarkable man and a real veteran when it comes to leadership that's respected in aviation, he came from Singapore Airlines. He's been at the forefront of this, and he's been very present since yesterday and all of the tragedy started to unfold.
Right. Anita, I would also like to get your thoughts on whether there's a correlation here with the fact that Boeing, Airbus, they're struggling with the demand. Do we have clear supply issues here? Does that have any sort of correlation with what we witnessed in India?
I would say not, only because no aircraft leaves the operating environment or goes into the operating environment and leaves the factory unless it has the go-ahead in terms of quality and safety. We know there were issues, as we said, with the Boeing 737 MAX and why regulators slowed down production. But with the 787 and any other aircraft, both Boeing and Airbus, as you say, they've really struggled with deliveries because of impact around supply chains interrelated to that, especially when it comes to engine manufacturing.
Anita, it's Karen here jumping into the conversation. Unfortunately, there have been a lot of air incidents and accidents in recent years to compare to. In this particular case, that effectively a crash on takeoff, 625 feet in the air and clear conditions, quite different to mid-air incidents, landing issues. How different is this, and what does it mean in terms of the circumstances for the investigators?
It is a worst case scenario in so many ways, because as you're saying, this was a large long haul aircraft that was just about to leave the airspace and could not get the lift that was required. Importantly, it was carrying approximately 130 tons of jet fuel. So when the challenges started and when ultimately there was impact, that spark created a catastrophic explosion, as we've seen, which spread well into the residential area in Ahmedabad itself. So the fact that it happened on liftoff and the way in which it happened with an immediate mayday puts very much pressure on understanding what exactly was the source of the problem. We can eliminate the environmental issues at the time because there clearly were no wind issues, visibility, etc. There are questions about bird strikes and the connection to the engines. There's connections about the working mechanics of the actual aircraft itself. Why was the undercarriage still in place? What was the issue with the flaps? And ultimately, how did the pilots respond to the situation at hand? This is a difficult one, and this is why the preliminary report will come out in 30 days, but the comprehensive report will require much more time. And all of us need to give space to those investigators qualified under the leadership of the aviation industry and the Bureau of Investigations in India itself, to allow the investigation to focus on not just establishing information, but verifying the information so we can understand exactly what happened and make sure that this never happens again to Boeing, to Airbus, to any manufacturer, to Air India, and any airline in any country in the world.